On the afternoon of November 14, 2024, at the front desk of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Department in Pennsylvania, the workday was proceeding as usual, a bit sluggish under the crisp, late autumn sun. That quiet was shattered by the arrival of an elderly couple, George and Helen Martin. They looked utterly frantic, their kind faces etched with extreme anxiety, their steps so unsteady they seemed on the verge of collapse. The desk sergeant quickly guided the couple to the public reception area. Detective Ben Carter, a senior member of the Criminal Investigation Division, was just returning from a meeting and happened to walk past. Seeing the elderly couple's profound distress, he knew this was no ordinary matter. He signaled to the sergeant and personally invited the Martins into his private office. Detective Carter calmly offered them a seat and some water, telling them to take their time and explain everything from the beginning. As soon as she sat down, Helen Martin burst into uncontrollable sobs, unable to speak. George, though trying to remain composed, could not hide his panic. His hands trembled and his voice broke. He pleaded with the officer to save their grandson, Ethan. He said the boy was missing and that he knew his stepmother, a woman named Eleanor, had done something to him. Detective Carter immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. He motioned for a junior deputy to sit in and take detailed notes. He urged the man to stay calm and recount everything from the start, when Ethan went missing and why they suspected his stepmother. And so, a tragic family story, filled with simmering conflicts on the verge of eruption, was recounted through the tearful and indignant words of two people in their twilight years. It all began that morning when they received a call from Ethan's homeroom teacher. The teacher informed them that Ethan had been absent from school for 3 days without any explanation. A dreadful feeling washed over them, and they frantically tried to call their grandson, but his phone went straight to voicemail. When they called his stepmother, Eleanor Vance, she answered with a chillingly casual tone, stating that Ethan was angry about not getting a new phone and had run off to stay with friends. George's voice trembled with anger as he tapped his hand on the desk, insisting she was lying. He said they had raised the boy from the time he was a baby and knew him well. Ethan would never do something like that. Feeling that something was deeply wrong, the couple had rushed straight to the house. George asked the detective to imagine the scene they found. Eleanor sitting on the sofa, painting her nails and watching TV. She saw them and did not even flinch, just kept insisting that Ethan had run away. When they asked if she had reported it to the police, she snapped at them for making a big deal out of nothing. He questioned the detective, asking if it was normal for a stepmother to be so calm and unconcerned when her husband's son had been missing for 3 days. Detective Carter listened in silence, his brow furrowing deeper. He then asked what the relationship between Ethan and his stepmother had been like before this happened. The question seemed to tap into a well of resentment the couple had long suppressed. They recounted their family's entire tragedy. They spoke of the death of their first daughter-in-law 5 years ago, and of their son, David Martin, who was devastated and decided to remarry Eleanor 3 years later. Helen continued, wiping away tears, explaining that her son had always been healthy. But somehow, after he married Eleanor, his health just started to fail. He grew thinner and thinner, his skin turning sallow. Eleanor made a big show of taking care of him, brewing herbal teas for him every day. But David just got sicker, and 2 years later, he was gone. They were so lost in their grief at the time that they did not think much of it, just assuming it was fate. But looking back, his death felt very suspicious. Then came the most crucial detail, the assets. David Martin's death left behind a massive estate, including a luxury villa, a large commercial chicken farm, and a substantial savings account. According to the will, Ethan was the sole heir. However, because Ethan was not yet 18, Eleanor, as his legal guardian, had full authority over the entire estate. George explained that she controlled all the money. His grandson was living like a guest in his own house and had to ask her for every penny. That was where the conflict came from. Ethan wanted to study abroad so he could come back and manage his father's business, but Eleanor refused. She wanted to keep him there where she could control him. She was afraid that once Ethan turned 18, she would be kicked out with nothing. George insisted that she hated his grandson. That was why, when they heard he was missing and saw her attitude, they were certain she had harmed him to get her hands on the inheritance. The grandparents' testimony painted a stark picture: a mysterious disappearance, a primary suspect with a clear financial motive, and an attitude and story riddled with contradictions. This was no longer a simple missing person case. Detective Carter understood he was facing a premeditated and potentially heinous crime. He looked at the two elderly people before him, their faces deeply lined with pain and desperation, and felt a surge of both sympathy and resolve. His voice firm, he assured them that their report was being officially taken. He promised them both that he would investigate this to the fullest extent and bring the truth to light to get justice for their family. After the Martins were escorted to another room to complete the paperwork, Detective Carter immediately returned to his office. He picked up the phone and called his captain, reporting that he had just taken a report on a missing juvenile with highly suspicious circumstances. He stated his belief that there was a strong possibility of homicide and requested that a major case investigation be opened immediately. After receiving approval from his superiors, Detective Carter quickly assembled a task force. He stood before a whiteboard, pinning a school photo of Ethan Martin, a boy with a gentle, studious face in the center. Beside it, he scribbled a few notes: missing 3 days, stepmother-stepson conflict, inheritance dispute. Finally, he circled the name Eleanor Vance and underlined it twice. He told his team their first order of business was to go straight to the property. One team would interview Eleanor Vance directly, while another would begin a preliminary search of the surrounding area, the house, and the farm. He had a feeling the answer to the boy's disappearance was still somewhere inside that villa. Just 15 minutes after George and Helen Martin left, the task force's vehicles were rolling. Detective Carter sat in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed on the passing scenery. He was not rushing. He knew the person he was about to face was no ordinary suspect. A woman who could calmly conceal the disappearance of her stepson for 3 days, who could lie so effortlessly to family and the school, had to have nerves of steel and a chillingly calculating mind. This confrontation would be a chess match. As the police vehicles turned into the long driveway of the villa, Eleanor Vance was already waiting at the door, as if she had been expecting their visit. She had changed into an elegant black silk dress and wore light but meticulous makeup that concealed any trace of fatigue or alarm. Her sharp beauty at 40, combined with her calm, confident posture, created an almost palpable aura of power. She smiled politely as Detective Carter got out of his car. Her voice was as smooth as honey as she welcomed the officers inside. She mentioned that she knew her in-laws would make a scene, explaining that they were elderly and worried too much, but insisted it was really nothing. Detective Carter did not return the greeting, simply nodding as he and his team stepped inside. The villa's living room was opulent, filled with expensive furniture and art, but it radiated a coldness, lacking the warmth of a family home. Detective Carter gestured to the sofa opposite him, inviting Eleanor to sit. He stated that they were there to clarify some issues regarding Ethan Martin's absence, noting the report that he had not been home for 3 days. He then asked her to tell them exactly what happened. Eleanor sighed, feigning weariness and frustration. She began to recount her prepared story, this time with more detail and emotion. She spoke of Ethan's declining grades and his demand for a new, expensive smartphone. She, wanting him to focus on his studies, had refused. This led to an argument. Her eyes welling up slightly, she explained that he was at a difficult age and had been missing his father, so his moods could be very volatile. She claimed she had only scolded him a little but supposed she had hurt his pride, and he stormed out. Of course, she was worried, she said, but she figured he was just staying with friends for a few days to cool off, something she felt every teenager did. She even added that she found a backpack in his room with some clothes packed, so he must have been planning it. With that, she signaled to a housekeeper, who brought out a sports backpack. Inside, there were indeed a few sets of clothes and some personal items. Eleanor's performance was nearly flawless, but Detective Carter was unmoved by her tears. He looked directly into the eyes of the woman acting before him. He questioned her story, pointing out that Ethan was the sole heir to a very large estate. He asked if a phone, even an expensive one, would really be a big enough issue to make him run away. Eleanor paused for a fraction of a second but quickly recovered. She stated that while the money was left by his father, she was his guardian and had a responsibility to teach him the value of money, not to let him have whatever he wanted. She claimed these disagreements over money were why they often clashed. Detective Carter pressed on, asking if she had contacted any of his friends or if she knew who he usually hung out with. Eleanor stammered that she was not really sure, claiming he rarely told her about his friends. The lie began to show its cracks. A stepmother, even a distant one, would likely know at least something about her stepson's social circle. Throughout the conversation, Eleanor never once expressed genuine concern for Ethan's safety. She only focused on painting a picture of a rebellious child and a pitiful, helpless stepmother. While Detective Carter was engaged in this tense battle of wits, the other teams had begun their work. One team entered Ethan's bedroom. The room was neat and tidy. A backpack was indeed missing, and the closet showed signs of being rummaged through. But the detectives noticed other, more unusual details. On Ethan's desk, his laptop and charger were still there. A stack of his favorite Japanese manga was neatly arranged on a bookshelf. And most significantly, on the small bedside table, a wooden picture frame held the most prominent spot. The photo was of Ethan with a woman who had a kind, gentle smile, his deceased mother. A young investigator remarked that it was strange. A teenager running away might forget clothes, but they would never leave behind their laptop, and especially not something with so much sentimental value. This discovery strengthened the theory that the runaway scene was a deliberate setup. Meanwhile, another team circled around to the back of the villa, where the large chicken farm was located. Thousands of chickens clucked incessantly in modern, long barns. The characteristic pungent smell of chicken manure and feed hung heavy in the air. But the detective's attention was drawn to a sturdy, concrete warehouse in the farthest corner of the farm, used for storing machinery and processing chicken feed. As they approached, a strange odor hit them. It was a harsh, acrid smell of industrial cleaning chemicals, like bleach and solvents. The chemical smell was so strong it almost completely masked the farm's odor. But mixed within it, there seemed to be another smell, a faint, cloying, slightly sweet and foul odor that could not be named, trying to push its way through the chemical layer. The warehouse door was unlocked. The detectives pushed it open and stepped inside. The space was large, with a few pieces of agricultural machinery. The concrete floor was soaking wet, showing signs of having been recently and thoroughly scrubbed and hosed down. Water was still pooled in the corners. The chemical smell was even stronger in here. And then they saw it. Standing imposingly in the middle of the warehouse was a large, industrial-grade grinder. This was the type of machine used to grind bones and agricultural byproducts to mix into animal feed. The machine looked relatively new, but the strange thing was that it too was unnaturally clean. Its entire stainless steel body gleamed, free of any dirt or grime, as if someone had meticulously scrubbed every last detail with chemicals. A veteran detective with years of experience walked closer. He knelt, put on a pair of gloves, and gently swiped a finger into a small crevice underneath the machine, a spot that would be difficult to reach during a normal cleaning. When he pulled his finger back, the tip was coated with a thick, reddish-brown substance. He brought it to his nose. Though faint, he could tell it was not the smell of machine grease. It was the smell of blood. The information was immediately relayed to Detective Carter via radio. After hearing the report, his expression remained calm, but a storm was raging inside him. A room cleaned with absurd thoroughness, a machine scrubbed with suspicious care, a powerful chemical smell meant to hide something else. All these details, combined with Eleanor's contradictory statements, pointed to a horrifying truth. He stood up, ending the conversation. He thanked Eleanor for her cooperation, his voice devoid of emotion, and stated they would continue to verify the information. In the meantime, he asked that she remain at her residence in case they needed to contact her. Eleanor smiled, the confident smile of someone who believes they have fooled everyone. She agreed, of course, and asked them to let her know immediately if they heard anything about Ethan. The police convoy departed. Once the car was out of sight of the villa, Detective Carter turned to his colleague in the passenger seat, his voice as cold as ice. He ordered 2 plainclothes officers to be placed on 24/7 surveillance of the villa, not wanting her out of their sight for a second. He had a feeling she was about to make her next move to destroy the last of the evidence. He knew he would be back to this place soon. And the next time, he would not be coming as a guest. He would be back with a search warrant in his hand. The next day, the investigation officially kicked into high gear. In the command room, Detective Carter stood before the whiteboard, where photos of Ethan and Eleanor were placed side by side, a grim contrast of innocence and cunning. The initial findings at the scene, the clumsily staged bedroom and the suspiciously sanitized warehouse, had solidified his theory. Eleanor Vance was lying. But to expose her lies, he needed more objective evidence, testimony from a world Eleanor could not control, Ethan's world. He told the task force that their objectives were clear. They needed to build a true profile of Ethan Martin through the people closest to him. Simultaneously, they needed to reconstruct his final hours through the lens of technology. These two lines of inquiry had to proceed at the same time. One team of detectives was immediately dispatched to the local high school. They not only met with the homeroom teacher but also arranged to speak with Ethan's closest friends. The conversation took place in the school counselor's office, a private space where the students could speak freely. The first to be interviewed was Leo Schmidt, Ethan's deskmate and best friend. Leo was a lively, sharp kid, but when he heard that Ethan was missing and that his stepmother might be involved, his expression became tense and filled with anger. Leo stated firmly that he did not believe it. He would never believe Ethan ran away. Absolutely not. Leo explained that Ethan was a very introverted person, especially after his father's death. The only person Ethan confided in was Leo. Ethan had often told him about the suffocating atmosphere of living with his stepmother. He said that she did not hit or yell at Ethan, but she controlled him more than a prison warden. Where he went, what he did, how much money he spent, he had to report everything. He said Ethan felt like he was living in someone else's house, not his own. Ethan's biggest dream was to get into a good college and study abroad to escape that place. He loved his grandparents so much he biked over to see them every weekend. Leo questioned how someone like that could just leave without telling anyone. When the detective asked about the argument over the phone, Leo scoffed, calling it her excuse. He insisted Ethan did not care about stuff like that, as his phone worked fine. He recalled that just last week, Ethan had told him he talked to his stepmother about looking into the application process for studying abroad. She had gotten furious and said he was just lazy and did not want to study. Ethan was really sad and disappointed. He told Leo he guessed he had to wait until the next year when he was 18 to decide his own life. Leo's testimony was a powerful blow to the narrative Eleanor had constructed. It showed that Ethan had no intention of running away. On the contrary, he had a clear plan for his future and was patiently waiting for the day he would be free. Meanwhile, the second line of investigation, handled by the Cybercrimes Unit, yielded equally critical results. After obtaining a warrant, they worked with the cell service provider to extract Ethan's entire call history and location data. The dry numbers on the report painted a chilling picture. The last call made from Ethan's phone was at 7 p.m. on November 11th, the evening before he supposedly ran away. It was a brief call to Leo to ask about homework. After that, there were no other outgoing or incoming calls. The phone's last location signal was recorded at 10 p.m. that night, pinging off a cell tower less than a quarter mile from the Martin villa. Then, the signal vanished completely, as if the phone had been powered off, the SIM card removed, or the device destroyed. His social media accounts and his online gaming profiles all showed the same thing: absolute silence since that evening. No new posts, no messages, not a single login. The vibrant digital life of a teenager had been abruptly severed. It was the hallmark of a passive disappearance, not the active choice of someone starting a new life. All the evidence, from his friend's testimony to the electronic data, pointed to a single conclusion: Ethan Martin did not run away. He disappeared suddenly and mysteriously from his own home on the very night Eleanor claimed they had argued. The stepmother's lie was now completely exposed. In parallel with these inquiries, the surveillance team continued to watch Eleanor. But contrary to expectations, she made no unusual or panicked moves. She maintained a disturbingly normal routine: shopping in the morning, directing workers at the farm in the afternoon, watching TV, or going to a spa in the evening. She presented the image of a wealthy, carefree woman enjoying her life, with no hint of a mother worried about her missing son. She never called any of Ethan's friends to ask about him, never posted a single missing notice on social media. To the detectives, that profound calm was the most abnormal behavior of all. However, on the 5th day since Ethan's disappearance, the surveillance team noted a significant action. Eleanor had a private meeting with a prominent lawyer at an upscale cafe. The meeting lasted over 2 hours. Although they could not hear the conversation, the act of seeking legal counsel at such a sensitive time showed she was preparing for a legal battle. It was highly likely she was inquiring about the procedures for declaring a person legally dead after being missing and the inheritance laws that would apply in such a case. Detective Carter synthesized all the information. The picture of the crime was becoming clearer. The motive, the conflict, the lies all had been established. But he was still missing the most important piece: the thing that would allow him to play his final card, physical evidence. He needed a solid reason, a strong enough pretext to get a comprehensive search warrant that would allow his forensics team to tear up every floorboard and dig up every inch of soil at that villa and farm, especially in the warehouse with the mysterious grinder. He knew Eleanor was a cunning fox. She would not easily make a mistake. But he also believed that no crime is perfect. No matter how calculating a killer is, they always leave a trace. He and his team were in a tense waiting game, a race against time and a test of patience. They had to wait for Eleanor to slip up or for an unexpected witness to appear, bringing them the final key to unlock the door to her crime. The investigation entered its 6th day. The task force's patience was being tested to its limits. Surveillance reported that Eleanor remained unnervingly calm, showing no signs of distress or any intention to flee. It seemed she was confident she had erased all traces, that no one could uncover the horrific crime she had committed. Detective Carter felt a growing sense of urgency, but he knew that in a battle of wits with a cold-blooded and cunning person like Eleanor, impatience was the enemy. He needed a breakthrough, a lightning bolt to strike down her seemingly perfect wall of defense. And that lightning bolt came from a completely unexpected source. That morning, a middle-aged man, looking weathered and dressed in modest work clothes, timidly approached the sheriff's department, asking to speak directly with the lead investigator on the Martin case. The man's name was Samuel Miller, a laborer who had worked at the Martin family's chicken farm for nearly 10 years. He had been fired by Eleanor just the day before without any valid reason. In Detective Carter's office, Mr. Miller sat nervously on the edge of his chair, wringing his calloused hands, his face a mixture of indignation and fear. He began, his voice low and hesitant, saying that he knew it might not be anything, but it had been weighing on his conscience. It was about the night that young Ethan went missing. He had seen the missus acting very strange. Detective Carter immediately sat upright. He knew this was what he had been waiting for. He calmly encouraged Mr. Miller to continue. Mr. Miller explained that the farm had a strict rule. All workers had to leave by 6 p.m., and the feed processing warehouse was always locked up. But around 11 p.m. that night, as he was checking some traps in a ditch near the farm, he was surprised to see the lights on inside the warehouse. Curious, he snuck closer, hiding behind a bush to peer through a window. His voice trembling at the memory, he recounted seeing something very strange. It was just the missus, Eleanor, in there by herself, running the big industrial grinder. The machine was roaring loudly. He found it odd because usually only the workers ran that machine during the day to grind up chicken bones and corn. The missus had never touched that heavy equipment, especially not in the middle of the night. She was wearing a full raincoat, hood up, with gloves and a face mask, looking very mysterious. Mr. Miller continued with a detail that sent a chill down Detective Carter's spine. She just kept pouring bucket after bucket of water into the grinder's funnel, and then she was scrubbing it with a brush, scrubbing it very hard, as if she were trying to clean something awful off of it. He only watched for a minute before he got scared and left. But the next morning when he came to work, he saw she had replaced all the old chicken feed sacks with brand new ones. And the smell of bleach in that warehouse was so strong you could smell it from a dozen yards away. Detective Carter asked why he was only reporting this now. Mr. Miller whispered that he was scared. He described the missus as a formidable woman and knew he would lose his job if he said anything. He had just thought maybe she had some private business. But then a few days later, he heard young Ethan was missing. And then yesterday, she had suddenly called him in, mumbled something about him being too old and not effective anymore, gave him a month's pay, and fired him on the spot. That was when he knew something was not right. He thought she had fired him to shut him up. He thought about it all night and decided he had to come tell them. Samuel Miller's testimony was the final piece of the puzzle, the golden key the task force had been desperately seeking. It connected all the disparate details perfectly. It recreated what had happened in that warehouse on that fateful night. Eleanor had not just killed Ethan, she had used the farm's own feed grinder to dispose of his body in the most macabre way imaginable. The overwhelming chemical smell was not to clean the floor, it was to try and erase the smell of blood, to erase the last traces of a human life. Immediately, Detective Carter convened the entire task force. He presented the new witness testimony, weaving it together with all the evidence they had already gathered, the financial motive, the demonstrably false alibi, the cell phone data, the staged scene, and the suspicious meeting with a lawyer. He concluded, his voice sharp and decisive, that they had more than enough. They had a direct witness who saw the suspect engaging in suspicious activity consistent with the disposal of evidence at the primary location on the night the victim disappeared. They had a clear motive. They had proven the suspect was lying. He was requesting an immediate warrant from the district attorney's office for a full forensic search of Eleanor Vance's residence and place of business, specifically authorizing the seizure and forensic examination of the grinder in the warehouse. The warrant application was drafted at top speed. Detective Carter personally took the file to the DA's office. Faced with the sharp reasoning and a logical, seamless chain of evidence, the district attorney, after a thorough review, did not hesitate. He signed the search warrant. That fateful document was now in Detective Carter's hand. It was more than a legal paper, it was a weapon of justice, the key that was about to break down the gates of hell that Eleanor Vance had so carefully constructed. That afternoon, a formidable force gathered in the parking lot of the sheriff's department. It included not only detectives from the criminal division but also reinforcements from the SWAT team and, most importantly, the county's top forensic scientists, carrying cases filled with specialized equipment. Detective Carter stood before his assembled officers, his face grim and resolute. His voice carrying across the lot, he told them their target today was not just a house but the scene of a heinous murder. Their mission was to turn over every stone, to examine every corner, and to miss no detail, no matter how small. He instructed them to be meticulous, professional, and to gather the evidence needed to make the monster hiding in human skin confess. For Ethan Martin's justice, he ordered them to move out. This time, the convoy of police cars did not move silently. Sirens blared as they sped down the highway under the fading light of dusk. They were heading for the Martin Villa. And on this return trip, they would not leave empty-handed. They would return with the truth. The police convoy turned onto the long gravel driveway leading to the villa in silence, sirens, and lights off to maintain the element of surprise until the last possible moment. As Detective Carter's lead vehicle came to a stop before the main gate, Eleanor Vance was in the front yard, watering flowers. Hearing the noise, she turned. The moment she saw the official vehicles and dozens of uniformed officers pouring out, the smile on her face froze. For the first time since the investigation began, Eleanor's confident, calm demeanor vanished, replaced by a flicker of unconcealable panic. Detective Carter, flanked by two other detectives and a representative from the DA's office, walked briskly toward her. He said nothing, simply held the search warrant up for her to see. His voice cold and firm, he stated that they had sufficient evidence to believe that evidence related to the disappearance of Ethan Martin was located on the property. He required her full cooperation with the investigation. Eleanor stared at the official seal and signature on the warrant, and her face went pale. She knew her charade was over. Any resistance now was futile. She simply fell silent and stepped back, allowing the force of the law to flood into the domain she had considered her own untouchable kingdom. The search was executed with systematic precision. Detective Carter quickly divided the teams. Eleanor and the household staff were gathered in the living room, monitored closely by two female officers to ensure they could not communicate with the outside or interfere. Other teams fanned out. One was responsible for the main villa. Another scoured the grounds and outbuildings. And the most important team, composed of the elite forensic unit and supervised by Carter himself, headed straight for the primary target, the feed processing warehouse at the edge of the chicken farm. When the warehouse doors were thrown open, the overpowering smell of cleaning chemicals once again assaulted them. But this time, the forensic team was prepared. Dressed in full hazmat suits and specialized masks, they began their work. The warehouse was immediately sealed off, transformed into a meticulously protected crime scene. They missed nothing. The concrete floor, despite its thorough scrubbing, was scraped for samples. The drainage system was dismantled, and the sludge from within was carefully collected. In a trash bin behind the warehouse, they found dozens of empty industrial-sized bleach bottles and brand new scrub brushes, their bristles frayed from aggressive use. It all pointed to an extraordinary effort to eliminate something horrific. But the focus of the search was the industrial grinder standing in the center of the room. Superficially, it was perfectly clean. But to the trained eyes of the forensic experts, that very cleanliness was the biggest anomaly. The lead forensic examiner ordered them to begin. A system of powerful lights was set up, illuminating every angle of the machine. The examiners began using their specialized tools. First came a UV light. Under its eerie purple glow, Traces invisible to the naked eye began to appear. On the wall behind the grinder and on the ceiling directly above it, faint, glowing splatters became visible. It was likely the signature of cleaned-up blood spatter, flung from the machine during operation. Each location was marked and photographed. Next, they began the autopsy of the death machine itself. Each component was carefully dismantled: the protective shield, the intake funnel, and most importantly, the cluster of razor-sharp steel blades inside. The work required extreme patience and precision. They examined every crevice, every screw. And then, they found the first traces. A young examiner called out, his voice tense, that he had found something. He was pointing to the central axis of the blades. It was a location that was extremely difficult to clean. While the surfaces of the blades had been wiped down, a thin, dark-colored film remained in the joint where the metal parts connected. A sterile cotton swab was inserted, gently collecting a sample. The swab immediately turned reddish-brown. But the definitive discovery, the one that made everyone hold their breath, came from beneath the machine's filter screen. This screen was designed to stop oversized materials from passing through. It too had been scrubbed, but caught in one tiny mesh opening in a hidden corner, something was still stuck. The lead examiner, a man with over 20 years of experience, used a pair of specialized forceps to gently pluck the object out and place it in a sterile Petri dish. Everyone leaned in to look. It was a single strand of hair, about an inch long, dark, wrapped tightly around a minuscule piece of off-white tissue, looking like a fragment of flesh that had been pulverized. A heavy silence fell over the warehouse. Although they had to wait for DNA confirmation, everyone in that room knew in their gut what they had found. They had found the last remains of Ethan Martin. They had found proof of an act of disposal so monstrous it was almost beyond comprehension. Detective Carter stood there, his hands clenched into tight fists, his knuckles white. A wave of pure rage washed over him. He could imagine the horrific scene that had taken place right where he stood. Ethan, after being murdered, had been brought here by his cold-hearted stepmother and fed into this very machine. He could not bear to think any further. He turned and strode quickly out of the warehouse. His voice, coming over the radio, was cold and sharp, cutting through the clucking of the chickens outside. He ordered the team at the main house to take the suspect, Eleanor Vance, into custody and bring her downtown immediately. As Eleanor was escorted out of the living room by 2 female officers, she no longer possessed her air of refined elegance. Her mask of calm had shattered, revealing a face contorted with fear and rage. She did not scream or resist, she just walked quietly. But the look she shot at Detective Carter as he emerged from the direction of the warehouse was filled with a venomous hatred. She knew this was the man who had destroyed everything. The first interrogation took place that night at the sheriff's department. Eleanor, now dressed in a standard issue grey jumpsuit, sat across from Detective Carter. She had quickly regained her composure. She began to employ her final weapon, absolute silence and denial. She repeated to every question that she did not know anything. She claimed they were arresting her illegally and that she would sue them for slander. When Detective Carter asked why she had scrubbed the warehouse so thoroughly in the middle of the night, she answered coolly that it was her property and she could clean it whenever she wanted, questioning if that was a crime. When he brought up the testimony of the farmhand, she scoffed. She dismissed him as a disgruntled employee she had fired, reasoning that of course he would make up lies about her. She asked if they actually believed someone like that. Eleanor proved to be a formidable opponent. She was calm, her logic was sharp, and she revealed no cracks in her testimony. She knew that until the lab results came back, she still had a chance to deny everything. Detective Carter did not press. He knew pressure would not break a woman like this. He signaled for the interrogation to be paused. He told his colleagues to let her sit on it. He believed that the calmer she acted now, the harder she would fall when they showed her the final proof. 2 days later, the forensic report arrived from the state crime lab in a sealed envelope. As expected, the results were conclusive. The tissue sample found in the grinder was human. The DNA from the hair found with it was a 100% match to the DNA from a hairbrush collected in Ethan's room. The UV reactive stains on the walls and ceiling were also confirmed to be human blood, matching the victim's blood type. All the evidence was laid on the table. The second interrogation began. Eleanor was led into the room. She looked less confident after 2 days in a holding cell, but she still tried to maintain a cold exterior. Detective Carter did not say much. He simply pushed the thick forensics file across the table to her. On top were large, clear photos of the hair and tissue fragment found in the grinder, magnified in grotesque detail. Detective Carter, his voice slow and deliberate, stated that the DNA was a match. The hair belonged to Ethan Martin. The flesh belonged to Ethan Martin. The blood on the walls belonged to Ethan Martin. He then asked if there was anything else she would like to say. Eleanor stared at the photos. Her lips began to tremble. The iron wall of defense she had so painstakingly built over the past week finally began to crack. She knew any further denial was pointless. She began to stammer, a final, clumsy lie. She claimed she did not mean to, that she only pushed him and he hit his head on the machine and died. Detective Carter slammed his hand on the table, his voice harsh for the first time. He told her to stop the act and confess to her crime. He demanded to know how she murdered Ethan and why she would do something so monstrous. His words were the final hammer blow that shattered Eleanor's false strength. She collapsed forward, her head on the table, her shoulders shaking violently. A raw, wailing sob tore from her throat, a sound full of bitterness, resentment, and terror. The demon, once unmasked, was finally revealed to be nothing more than a weak and pathetic human being. Over the next several hours, Eleanor confessed everything. Her confession was a chilling narrative of cold, calculated evil. The conflict had reached its peak after their argument about his plans to study abroad. That night, she pretended to make up, personally cooking Ethan's favorite meal, chicken and dumplings. But in his bowl, she had mixed a massive dose of powerful sleeping pills. After dinner, Ethan quickly fell into a deep, unbreakable sleep. Seizing the opportunity, Eleanor took a pillow and pressed it firmly over his face until he stopped breathing. After the murder, she felt no panic. She dragged Ethan's body to the warehouse, where she had already made preparations. And there, she committed her most depraved act, using the industrial feed grinder to dispose of the body. She believed that in doing so, no trace of Ethan Martin would ever be found on this earth again. The rest of the remains, she had mixed into the feed and spread out for the thousands of chickens in the farm to consume, a final, horrific act to completely erase the existence of the stepson she hated. After completing this gruesome task, she spent the rest of the night scrubbing the scene with chemicals and then staged the runaway scene in his bedroom. She believed that after a few days, she could report him missing, and after a few years, by law, she would become the legal heir to the entire estate. Her plan was nearly perfect. But she had not counted on the determination of two elderly grandparents, the dedication of a homeroom teacher, and the sharp instincts of a team of detectives. And most importantly, she had failed to erase every last microscopic trace of her crime. The confession ended. A suffocating silence filled the interrogation room. The detectives looked at the woman sobbing before them, feeling not a shred of pity, only a profound and absolute disgust. For money, for greed, a human being had proven capable of trampling every boundary of humanity. The case of the stepmother who ground up her stepson sent a shockwave of horror across the country. The scale of the greed and the sheer brutality of the crime stunned the public. The trial of Eleanor Vance drew intense media attention and hundreds of onlookers. In the courtroom, Eleanor no longer cried. She sat silently with empty, soulless eyes. Faced with the irrefutable evidence and her own confession, she offered no defense. The final verdict was delivered. For the crime of first-degree murder, carried out with extreme depravity and premeditation for financial gain, Eleanor Vance received the highest possible sentence, the death penalty. The sentence was read in a silent courtroom. There was no applause, no crying, only a heavy cloud of sadness and disgust. Justice had been served, but the pain this crime left behind would never fade. The case closed. The Martin villa became a cold, abandoned place. After arranging the funeral for their poor grandson, George and Helen Martin sold the entire estate and donated most of the money to charity. They wanted nothing to do with a place so stained with tragedy and blood. The story of Eleanor Vance became a terrifying cautionary tale about the depravity of human greed, a story showing that the line between a beautiful woman and a monstrous devil can sometimes be terrifyingly thin. But when everything seemed to be over, in the minds of many, and especially in Detective Carter's case file, one large, haunting question remained unanswered. It was about the death of David Martin, the unfortunate father and husband. He had died of a sudden illness, his health declining rapidly in just 2 years of marriage to Eleanor. Why did a healthy man fade away so quickly? Was it really fate, or was it also part of a long-term, calculated plan by his murderous second wife to seize the family fortune? Were the herbal remedies that Eleanor so diligently brewed for her husband every day truly medicine, or were they a slow-acting poison, killing him gradually without a trace? The law requires proof, and with David long since buried, finding that proof was nearly impossible. That crime, if it happened, would likely remain a secret, buried forever with Eleanor Vance. The case was closed, but it left behind a lingering, questionable end, a reminder that sometimes, the most horrific truth is the one we can never truly know.